You're listening to a CNA podcast.
To parents of special needs kids, they don't have it easy. It can be isolating and overwhelming, and it comes with heavy financial burdens that extend long into their adulthood. I'm Andrea Heng. Welcome to the Money Talks podcast, where we turn your personal finance concerns into real talk. Now back to the topic. So let's examine the expenses involved, from the necessary to the add-ons, while also considering the financial assistance that's available to parents of a special needs child, and more importantly, the funds you need to set aside for them for when you are no longer around. And we felt the best person to do that is someone who himself is a parent to a special needs child. He is Frederic Maury. He's Executive Vice President for Asia at Trigo and is father to 21-year-old Ayano, who has an intellectual disability. Welcome, Frederic, to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
What was the first thing that went through your mind when you first found out that Ayano has an intellectual disability?
It goes way, way back. I did not find out. It was my wife who did. Our daughter, Ayano, was 2 years old. And I guess mothers are probably the best observer, the best doctors. And she had identified that there was some development delay in our daughter. And I was pretty much in denial, I think, like many fathers tend to be. And she alerted me and she pointed me to several criteria for intellectual disability. And it was obvious that she was ticking the box of many of those. And then I got to realize, so she was 2 years old. And now she's 21.
So help us understand, Frederic, what is her condition exactly, just for those of us who may not be familiar with it?
So she's in what we call the autism spectrum disorder. If we classify, she has GDD, global development delay. So concretely, what does it mean? In terms of cognitive abilities, I would say she has the cognitive ability of 5 or 6 years old. What is helping her a lot is she has very good social skills. She has very good interpersonal skills. And therefore, what she could not achieve cognitively, she's making up for it in her social skills. She always leaves memory with people. And this helped her a lot until now.
Oh, that's wonderful. It makes me want to meet her as well.
Thank you.
We understand that finances involved in raising a special needs child, it tends to differ quite a fair bit from raising a normal child, right? Because there are specific things like therapy, and then there's very targeted enrichment lessons, for example. These can be quite costly. So when you and your wife, Yuko, mapped out the finances for raising Ayano, how did you approach it? Did you plan to the granular, finest detail of what you needed for Ayano, or did you address her needs per the milestones that she hit in life?
I guess it's more the latter. And until we moved to Singapore, because we moved a lot in Asia until we came here 12 years ago, until we moved here, our approach had been to basically cater to her needs as they arise. So she would need speech therapy, we paid for speech therapy. She would need occupational therapy, we would pay for occupational therapy. And so we went along the way. Lucky for us, our financial situation allowed us to do this. Now, where it really changed is when we came to Singapore and she joined Mind School. She was at Lee Kong Chiang Garden School. And as she became 16 years old, Mind's school organized a workshop to essentially raise awareness and to start planning. And this was back in 2020, so not that long ago. And only was it then that we really started thinking, planning for Ayano's future needs.
Talk to me about the specific costs involved, right? How much did any of these courses, on average, what would this cost?
Typically, on a monthly basis, occupational therapy, speech therapy. On top of this, she has a severe scoliosis, so back therapy. All those together, back then we were looking at easily 3,000 Sing dollars a month. So that's a hefty bill for any household. Yeah.
And did you feel like that money spent was effective in helping her?
So we felt it was effective, but it was not planned ahead. It was more, there is a need, we react to the need, we can afford to pay for that, so we do it. But there was no formal planning. And in a way, there was a type of denial, in a way, unconscious denial, because we knew as she grows up, some point she becomes an adult, and we have to plan for her future. But we never took the conscious step to start planning. And I must say, and I'm not advertising for Minds or others, but it was really Minds organization that handheld us and showed us. She was 17 back then. She's 17. She will be 18. She'll be 21. You are the legal guardian. After 21, things become different. You need to start planning.
Yeah.
And so then we moved on from an ad hoc approach to a very carefully planned approach with a clear vision of what we want to achieve for her. Yeah.
What was challenging back in her earlier years, before she turned 17, before you moved to Singapore even? What was challenging for you in terms of finding the right kind of help?
Before Singapore, we lived in Hong Kong. Before that, we lived in mainland China, in Shanghai. And I have to say, one of the challenges in those countries was the access to information is not eased as it is in Singapore. So there is not only the structure that there is in Singapore in terms of having organizations like Minds, SG Enable, but the guidance and the language, those were enablers in Singapore, which we do not have in the other countries where we lived. And because she was younger, because those countries were not as, I would say, foreigner friendly as Singapore is, then, combine this together made it more difficult for us to plan as we should have done maybe earlier, but no regret, because we did it in Singapore and we did it in a way that now we know exactly where we're going, where she will be going, whether we're here or whether we have passed on and she's by herself.
I'm going to get to that in the later part of the conversation, because I am really curious about what you need to think about as a parent for the later years. But I want to tackle this first. There was a prior interview that I read about where you noted it was particularly concerning to plan for Ayano's future because you and your wife, you are foreigners, as you've noted, and you don't have family in Singapore. It is one thing to be a foreigner, but it's quite another that you don't have family members in Singapore to rely on, right? And to turn to for support. So you got involved in the Minds program. It's called the Minds Future Care Planning. What was the biggest lesson in financial planning for Ayano as a special needs child that this program taught you?
One cannot be casual when it comes to financial planning. And on top of it, when the person is a special needs individual like Ayano, even more so, it cannot be casual. And so that was the biggest lesson I remember from that workshop in 2020. Essentially what happened, Future Care plan organized by under Minds organization held that workshop and invited representative of two organizations. One is ADAP, it's an Assisted Deputyship Application Program, and the other one was SNTC, the Special Need Trust Company. And essentially in that workshop, if I try to give the highlights, Minds explain your child is 17. After 2021, unless you take proper steps, you may not be able to make legal decisions because they will no longer be a minor. So
that's right.
You need to plan now. And in order to plan, you need to become a deputy. And in order to do this, you have an organization called ADAP. That's one thing. And in order to plan financially for the future, you need to start thinking, you need to start projecting cost, and there is SNTC who can also help you. So one was, I would say, the legal part of things. How can you as a caregiver remain allowed by law to make legal decision? And then once you've done this, how do you set aside some money?
When you turn 21, you're an adult and your life is normal, right? When you're a special needs person, you're unable to make some of those independent decisions and you still kind of need your parents around.
So ADA basically is going to help the caregivers to be allowed to make legal decision for special needs after that individual is 2021. What it entails is, in order to be a legal representative, it has to be recognized by the country. So that deputyship has to be recognized by a proper authority at country level. We receive a court order saying Frederic and Yuko are allowed to make legal decision for Ayano after she's 21. So what ADAP does is really making sure that the proper steps are taken. So that's the legal part.
Right.
And then the financial part, this one is more addressed with SNTC.
Okay.
Where SNTC comes in and then helps us through the appointment of a case manager, help us to plan for Ayano's financial needs until she also passes on herself. Along the way, help us help her adjust her financial needs, but in a way that is legally recognized by the country, hence the first step with the
Right.
EDAP.
And if you decide to move out of Singapore, are those two things legally recognized by other countries as well? Or would you have to go through another legal process to get those things recognized?
So it's a very good question, because we asked that question because back then when we did the application, we were PR. Now our situation has changed. There are some countries where there are bilateral recognition of the scheme, but if we would move back to France, where I'm originally from, we would have to reapply under the local laws.
Ah, okay. And I hate to put this into context, but for practical reasons, what happens when the caregivers, you and your wife Yuko, what happens to those things when you die?
Sure. This is what the Minds, together with ADAP and SNTC, help us to tackle, because that will happen. That's a fact of life.
Exactly.
So we have set up a trust with SNTC.
Right.
So every month, every year, we're setting aside some money for INO. The day Yuko and I pass on, then the money gets disbursed monthly, quarterly, essentially according to the instructions we have given and using the funds that we have set aside for her.
Would that include things like inflation?
Yes. Yes. So
Okay.
when we have set aside money for INO, there is an interest rate that gets built on every year. And then the money that will be disbursed for her is according to the funds and taking into account inflation. And all of this is done in accordance with the instructions that we have given.
You also have a younger daughter.
Correct.
And she's not special needs. Where does she fit in all of this in terms of your legacy plan, in terms of, the care?
Sure. Her sister, younger sister, called Sawako. Obviously, she's fully aware of her sister's condition, and the way we've structured, again, I would say the contract or the legal terms of the deputyship is that first, Yuko and I will be handling INO's finance, and when Yuko and I pass on, with the court order, the disbursement will be following our instructions, and Sawako is entitled, if she wants, to take our place as legal guardian, but she's not obliged to do so.
It's optional for
It's
her.
optional, exactly, and that's a personal choice.
Sure.
We did not want her to have that burden because we thought we are the parents, we're the caregivers. It is our role to plan for INOs. Whether Sawakos want to help in the future, that's her decision,
Yep.
but it should not be imposed by us on her when she's so young, and she's entitled to have her own future in or outside of Singapore.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, absolutely. And it must have put you in quite a tricky position as parents as well, to two very different children. Looking further ahead, when you and your wife are no longer around, what's the most important thing you've included in this legacy plan, so to speak, to ensure that Ayano is taken care of?
The most crucial was, I would say, not one thing, but three things. We want her to have a roof. We want her to eat every day. And we want her to get medical treatment if she needs. So she's a human being. Before being a special needs, like any of us, she's a human being. And she's entitled, like any of special needs people, she's entitled to a decent life, to keep her decency.
What's a piece of advice that you have for a fellow parent with a special needs child or children who may right now be feeling overwhelmed?
I would have two pieces of advice. First, I would say before any financial consideration, and because Yuko and I have been in that situation before, my first message to caregiver parents is you're not alone. There are many parents out there who have special needs, various degrees. Do not let be yourself overwhelmed. Reach out to other people. There are many organizations in Singapore, SG Enabled, Minds, and other associations maybe I'm not even aware of, where caregivers can meet other parents, can meet people who can advise. So this is my first piece of advice is you're not alone, reach out. Then from a financial standpoint, because financial planning is very essential and comes into the limelight when the special needs become 17, 18. So my second piece of advice is same thing. In Singapore, there are many organizations, SG Enable, Minds, that can help parents understand what they have access to, that can also help parents, caregivers, understand and apply to financial grants, tax subsidies, financial relief schemes. So all those organizations raise awareness with the parents on the importance of financial planning. And they're also there to guide them, to basically handhold them throughout the process of applying.
And finally, apart from special assistance schemes and all that kind of stuff, what was like one money-saving hack, money-saving tip that you have for a parent of a special needs child, considering especially since the expenses would be quite costly?
So we used to go to hospital for Ayano, to, I would say, fairly expensive hospital. When you have a special needs, sometimes some of them, that's the case of Ayano, are scared. They have fear when they enter into a hospital.
The environment.
The environment. In the case of Ayano, when she was younger, she could immediately recognize she's in an environment where there are going to be doctors. And then sometimes she would panic. There was no way to get Ayano to sit on a chair at the dentist clinic. Impossible.
I mean, it is a scary prospect, even for regular people.
Correct. It's even scary for us, so for her, even more so. Minds Clinic, what's beneficial in this? Number one, people in Minds Clinic, that's a general practitioner, but we are dealing with doctors, with people who are aware of the special needs of those individuals. So the way they handle them is so different from the way in a general hospital, number one. Number two, the fees are ridiculously low compared to what we used to pay in private hospital.
Wow.
This is an example of, again, Singapore putting at the disposal of caregivers, in this case, medical support, at a very low cost and a way that is suitable for special needs, because it's through Minds, and therefore, again, with people who have that awareness of the behavior and special needs of those individuals.
The requirements. You know what, Frederic, this has been really an eye-opening conversation. I think it was one that we really felt we needed to have on the Money Talks podcast. We were glad that you've been able to share your experience with us, and I'm very sure that a lot of parents of those special needs kids will find this conversation beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we let you go, there's a segment on the Money Talks podcast that injects a little bit of fun. It's called Questions from a Hat. You see the hat here? There are 5 questions in this hat. I'll need you to pick one and I'll read it out and then you can answer it. So, Frederic, what financial advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
I would say probably something I didn't do when I was 20 years old is start saving for your retirement.
I think that's 90% of us.
This is probably what I guess I would give myself, this advice.
But how would you advise a 20-year-old today and convince this 20-year-old you need to think about your retirement 60, 70 years down the road? What would you say to this 20-year-old?
That's a good question because I haven't said it yet to my daughters. I need to do it to the second one.
Yeah.
I would tell them, how much do you need? How much money do you need every month? How much do you think you need every month to live the life that you're dreaming of? Because at 20 years old, we have dreams. At 20 years old, you're right. We don't think about, I need to plan for my retirement. I need to plan for my mortgage. We think of exploring the world for some of us, or having some fun, or having the life we want. So I would tell myself, I would say, Fred, how much do you need to do all the dreams, to achieve all the dreams you want? And how much do you think you can set aside besides, after having spent all that money? How much can you set aside every month? Set aside that money and all the rest, then live your dreams as much as you can.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Frederic.
Thank you.
Listener, we hope you have something to take away from this episode. Now, if you know anyone who is or about to be a parent to a special needs child, please share this episode with them, because a little help goes a long way. As Frederic said, all you need to do is reach out, or you can do it the other way around. If you know someone in this situation, spread the word to them, and you can make a real difference in their lives. This is the Money Talks podcast. It's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube Music. You can leave us a rating when you are able to. Many thanks to the hardworking team, Crispina Robert, Tiffany Ang, Junaini Johari, Joanne Chan, and Saye Wind. I'm Andrea Heng. Thank you so much for listening to Money Talks.